Hi, good evening, class. How is everyone doing? Cherie, hi, how are you? Good evening, Mel. Welcome, class, to Unit 8. Hi, Brandon. Good evening, Christina. Hi, Jessica. Hi, Miranda. Johanna, hi, how are you? Wilma, good evening. Happy Tuesday. I'm used to saying happy Wednesday, but it's a happy Tuesday, everyone. And thank you again for taking the time to attend our Unit 8 seminar, which of course is one day in advance. So thank you. I will try my best not to take up too much of your time. I want to talk about what's coming up with Unit 8. We are covering the category of leases, Chapter 16. We do have another writing assignment, and I know some of you use Tuesday evenings to wrap up your discussion board and also, do the final touches to your assignment. So I want to make sure that you still have your own personal time tonight to basically wrap up Unit 7. So before I go into Unit 8, I want to make sure that everyone knows what is expected from them for Unit 7. So let me just, I actually have the Unit 7 PowerPoint open. And I just want to remind everyone that you do have those 3 items to complete for a grade. I've already graded your Unit 7 seminar participation last week. And at the close of tonight's seminar, I do have another seminar right after this one. So at the close of that seminar, so in about 2 hours, I will update your grade for the Unit 8 seminar participation and attendance. And also, you do have an assignment. It's a client letter that we talked about in Unit 7. A little bit, Brandon, right? A little bit just to try to make sure that I get everything done. Also, I don't know if you noticed, but you could check your grade book. If you have already posted your 3 substantive comments in a span of 3 separate days for Unit 7, I have graded your Unit 7 discussion board participation. Again, just so kind of trying to get a heads up since I will be traveling the rest of the week and attending a conference. So I will be, my schedule will be a little disruptive. So I'm trying to get as much done prior to my travel and my conference time. Again, just to try to get this to you as soon as possible. So just keep that in mind. If you haven't turned in that Unit 7 assignment, you have tonight to turn it in. Also, you still have today to participate in that discussion board. Again, just as a reminder, for full credit in any discussion board participation, you have to post a minimum of 3 substantive comments in a span of 3 separate days during that unit time frame. Even though we're talking about Unit 8 this evening, Unit 8 does not officially start until tomorrow. So you're more than welcome to draft your Unit 8 discussion board response, but just post it tomorrow at the start of Unit 8. And I know some of you are still participating in the Unit 7 discussion board. So if you don't have a grade yet for your Unit 7 discussion board participation, again, you still have time to get those comments in to try to maximize your points. And some of you who have not participated, again, you still have time to do that. So I just wanted to remind everyone also on the format of that Unit 7 assignment. Last week, I did provide a template. Again, it's a template. You're not required to use it, but I'm going to share it in the chat box again for your reference. And I also created one for Unit 8 because in Unit 8, you'll also be required to do a complete client letter. This time, the client letter in Unit 8 will be to a different client pertaining to landlord-tenant law, and you'll be using landlord-tenant law from your jurisdiction. So a little bit different, but for the most part, same template with some headings. So in the chat box, I've added both templates, the Unit 7 assignment template that, again, you're not required to use. I just created it for your convenience. It's an APA format too, just with that title page and that reference page. If you don't use any other outside sources for our Unit 7 assignment besides our readings, which is fine because, again, our readings have all the information for the most part for Chapter 7. And then Unit 8, you will have to cite your source for your property code, for your landlord and tenant laws in your jurisdiction. So make sure to include that as well as your digital book. Okay. Has anybody been having any problems accessing your digital book? I usually access it at the start of our seminar. So I'm going to access it again just to make sure that everyone can access it. If you have an issue on your end, it could be a technical issue. I'm uploading, I'm sorry, I'm accessing it right now, and there's no issues. Just also be mindful if you're using a tablet or a cell phone, there may be issues with that, but try to use a different device like a laptop or a desktop. And it just loaded. Like I said, we're covering Chapter 16, which is in Part 3, and Chapter 16 deals with residential and commercial leases. And let me just share my screen to show you that our digital book is working. We'll be talking about the different types of tenancies, rental rates, writing requirements, and again, to satisfy the statute of frauds. We talked about statute of frauds in Unit 2 when we talked about contract law, the different types of provisions that you usually find in common leases. And then one of the most important parts that you'll be incorporating in your Unit 8 assignment to your client will be the tenant's rights and landlord's duties. So you'll talk about the rights and duties and obligations of both the landlord and the tenant. And then, of course, American with Disabilities Act, which we'll talk about also this week in our discussion board, and landlord's tort liability. We'll talk a little bit about tort law in this unit, as well as what happens if there's a default. Because this is a contract and it's complying with the statute of frauds, we also talk about potential breaches. If there's a breach, what is a remedy for the non-breaching party? Because again, the landlord can be in breach of the lease agreement as well as the tenant. So depending on the scenario, will determine what type of remedies are available to both parties. And eviction, what is the eviction process, especially in your state? It may vary from jurisdiction to jurisdiction. So it's always important that you look to see what the eviction process is, not where you live, but actually where the property is located. That's very important because the subject matter of the dispute is the property in question, the property that's being leased or rented out. So it's important that we look at that as well. And then how do you select tenants? Does anybody here own rental property? Have you had good experiences, bad experiences? I own rental property and I am a landlord, and I've had good experiences, bad experiences, and it's really something that it's learning lessons, with your first property, and then you kind of have like a learning curve, and you can have some really good experiences. And it's also about selecting your tenants and making sure that you have a good application. You do a credit check, a background check, you call those references, things of that nature. Do your due diligence because that's also important to make sure that you're able to select the best tenant that works for you and for your property. Also, there's issues you may want to talk about, whether you allow pets and what type of pets. So things of that nature is always important as well. And then what about assignments and subleases and the difference between the two? And also now, because a lot of property is used as Airbnb property, would you allow your tenants to do that? Is there a clause talking about that? So again, things like that are now being covered in your standard boilerplate leases. So we'll also talk about that in the discussion board. Again, there's so much information. And the law has basically expanded in this area. And for the most part, way back when, it was very one-sided, benefiting the landlord. But we do have now a lot of rights and we have a lot of duties and obligations to the landlord and a lot of rights to our tenants. So again, a lot of great information. Our digital book is working. Let me toggle back to make sure I'm sharing the right screen. And we're looking at tonight's PowerPoint. Oh, but before I forget, are there any questions about your Unit 7 assignment? Again, we are wrapping up Unit 7 this evening, so I want to make sure that you have understanding of your requirements. This is an assignment and actually this is the Unit 8 is what I'm bringing up. But just as a reminder of what to complete for your Unit 7 assignment, making sure that you have that Unit 7 assignment completed and you have it turned in, as well as participating in the discussion board. So let me find, here we go, here's the Unit 8. So like I said, we're covering a Unit 8. Unit 8 officially begins tomorrow, February 19th, and Unit 8 is still scheduled to close out next Tuesday, February 25th. For those of you who are listening back to the recorded transcript or the recorded session for this Unit 8 seminar, you have until Tuesday, February 25th to submit the alternative assignment for this Unit 8 seminar. Oh, yes, I think I copied over it, Cherie, but I can actually share it again, and I have it listed. Hopefully, unless I just resaved it under it, that could have been the problem as well. But hopefully, I didn't do that. If not, I can email it. If somebody still needs a template, I can email the template for that Unit 7 assignment. So it looks like I did resave it under Unit 7. So here is the Unit 8. Sorry for the confusion on that. Okay. So like I said, we are covering, you're welcome. We are covering um, leases. And like I mentioned, leases for the most part, it's all located in Chapter 16. So we're focused on the rights, duties, responsibilities of the landlord, as well as the rights, duties, and obligations of the tenant. And then, of course, what are the remedies both available to the tenant and the landlord should the other party default? And then, of course, we'll talk about the differences between an assignment of a lease and a sublease, which again is that privity to contract and the different ways in which you compute rent under a lease. So there's different types of tenancies. You could do month to month, you could do a 1-year lease, you could do a lease with option to buy. There's many different options you have, and that's something you may want to negotiate too, especially with a lease with option to buy. Will a portion of your rental payments be credited towards a purchase price? The purchase price will have to be set in advance. So there's a lot of provisions that you have to set in advance with a lease with option to buy. And then, of course, you have a contract for deed, which is something completely different if you choose to do like an owner finance situation. So again, there's a lot of options you have. If the owner to the property or your landlord is willing to owner finance or to enter into a contract for deed or to do an option of a lease with option to buy, or even a longer period of tenancy, let's say it's a 5-year lease, and then also the advantage to that is that it could lock you in to a certain um, rental amount or something structured like that within a longer period may allow for yearly increases just to adjust for that inflation or the cost of living, right? So things to think about too if you enter into something with a longer period than a 1-year lease. So 3 items again to complete for a grade in Unit 8. You have a discussion board that begins tomorrow, tonight's seminar worth 20 points, and then your next writing assignment. So we basically only have two writing assignments left. We have a writing assignment in Unit 8 and then a writing assignment in Unit 10. This writing assignment for Unit 8, like I said, it's another client letter. So it's a great opportunity to become familiar with the format of a client letter. One important formatting issue that students tend to forget about is single spacing your letter. So you have to single space your paragraphs and your letter, and then in between paragraphs, you'll double space. So make sure your settings, your paragraph settings are correct, because you can lose points for formatting if your paragraph settings are not correct. Let's take a look at the discussion board. You do have, or for Unit 8. Unit 10, I think it's a PowerPoint presentation. I'd have to just double check, but you do have a client letter in Unit 7, which ends today, and then you do have another client letter for Unit 8, which begins tomorrow. And then for Unit 10, you actually have PowerPoint presentation. So it's a simple PowerPoint presentation that requires a minimum of 6 to 8 slides, not including your title slide or your reference slide, and we'll be focusing on a real estate closing and basically providing that information on what goes on during a real estate closing. It's an event that occurs when a person is purchasing property or a person is selling property. So this closing event occurs for both the seller and the buyer, and it occurs in a title company for the most part. So you'll be talking about examining the different steps of real estate closing, and all this information can be located in chapters 10 and 11. So you'll be using chapters 10 and 11 for Unit 10 to summarize the steps in a real estate closing. And then more importantly, you'll also have a slide dedicated to talking about what is that HUD-1 settlement statement. And then you'll also talk about what is the minimum documentation that a seller must provide at closing. So if you've ever attended a closing as either a seller or a buyer, there's a lot of paperwork involved. You would think with technology, everything would be just click, 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 but there's still some things that require an actual signature, actual documentation. The funding, for the most part, does happen electronically, which you'll also talk about in escrow. So those are some of the key things that you'll talk about in this PowerPoint presentation. So it's a lot easier because, again, it's a PowerPoint presentation. It's not necessarily a writing assignment. And again, it's a minimum of 6 to 8 slides, excluding your title slide and your reference slide. You do not have to record your presentation, so do not worry. Oftentimes students will ask if you have to record your presentation. No, you do not. So that is a very last assignment. So basically in Unit 8, your very last assignment will be this last client letter. So let's take a look at the discussion board. The discussion board topic is going to be tenants with disabilities. You are to visit two websites, one dealing with the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, and there's two separate documents. However, one document I noticed has a broken link. It's no longer working. The disability man is still working. So you do have, I'm going to provide the link in the chat box. And here is the article. So you are to visit the Department of Housing and Urban Development, HUD. That's abbreviation for Housing and Urban Development. So oftentimes you'll hear the word HUD, the acronym, and it's referring to the Housing and Urban Development. This is the link provided discussing disability and the main points related to disability, from a disability overview to what is Section 504. So you can toggle through all that information. So that's your first task, is visiting HUD and looking at the main page to disability. And the second one is a consumer's guide to fair housing. This document is no longer active. It's a broken link. The file is not found. However, I did find one actually from the National Association of Realtors. So I will add that in the link in the chat box. So that's a second link, and this is what it looks like. You can also do your independent research and locate additional information pertaining to basically a consumer's guide to fair housing. HUD also more likely has, if you go straight to their website, um, and let me see if I could do a quick search through HUD. So if we go through HUD here, and let me see if I can use their search bar here and see what I can locate. Uh, does it look like I found something in particular? Maybe this one. Here's some additional publication. I'll add this one as well and provides just additional information. Oops. There's the other link to this one, dealing with fair housing, and just some additional reports. But this one is pretty useful, the one that I'm sharing from the National Association of Realtors. So once you read up on both the disabilities main page and a consumer's guide to fair housing, you are going to answer this question. And there's actually, it's a two-part question. Number one, if you represent a landlord and doubt that a major life activity of a tenant is impaired, what remedies and alternatives do you have? And then number two, what resources would you use to determine the legal definition of major life activity? So our focus is going to be about major life activity because as a landlord, you do have to provide um, accommodations when there's a major life activity and the tenant can prove that he or she is impaired. And there's certain rights and duties and obligations that the tenant has under HUD. And this is why you focus on that main disability page, talking again about the overview and what is Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973. So, and it also gives you more information about the Fair Housing Act. But one phrase, and this is why we're talking about this phrase in our discussion board, is what qualifies as a major life activity, because that is the point of to figure out if you need to make those accommodations as a landlord. So that's kind of like the $1,000,000 question. So we often look to case law, we look to interpretation by these administrative agencies such as HUD to see what their findings are. So that's pretty much the main discussion of our discussion board for this week. And if I find another link, and this might be another one, I might share. And this is just more like of a guide, but I'll share and I'll save this one to post it in the discussion board. So if I find additional resources, I'll go ahead and share them in the discussion board as well in hopes that it can help further along your research here. And of course, if you find something and you come across an article or you come across some additional information in the HUD's website, please feel free to also share that. So any questions on your discussion board? Let me close out my, okay, great. So let's take a look at going back to our PowerPoint. And let's take a look at this week's assignment. So here is the scenario. Last week, Blake, which is your supervising attorney, left for a well-deserved vacation, and you are working with Nadia, which is another junior attorney at the firm. Nadia has asked you to prepare a letter to one of your clients by the name of Rachel Banks. And this client is unaware and unsure how to proceed with lease agreements. So we're going to use this client letter as an educational, informative letter to our client. Basically, here's some background information. Rachel recently inherited a duplex from her recently deceased brother, and she has never been a landlord before and is uncertain of the duties of a landlord nor the rights of a tenant. So we need to provide some educational background and material. And again, she's not well versed in the legal jargon, so it's important that we use plain language when discussing like the rights and duties and obligations of not only her as a landlord. We'll also have to identify that she will now become a landlord and the rights and duties to the tenants who are currently living in this duplex if they are currently being utilized. Right. So Rachel has also been researching the different types of tenancies, which again are available in Chapter 16, and the requirements for termination associated with each type. So that's also important because every different type of tenancy will determine, again, what rights and duties and what rises to the level of terminating it. And, what happens? Are you a holdover tenant? What happens if you become a tenancy at will? If, let's say, you don't renew that lease and now you're basically a month to month, things that we'll talk about in those different types of tenancies. And basically, she's obviously overwhelmed by all of this. Not only is she grieving the loss of her brother, but now she has to figure out, what is she going to do with this duplex? And oftentimes, some people who feel overwhelmed when they inherited rental property like this, they often contemplate selling their property because it can be a very big hassle. Sometimes some owners will hire a management company, and the management company, obviously for a fee, will handle all these day to day activities and basically um, becoming the landlord for the most part for Rachel. So this is a contract that you enter into with this management company, and that's something you can do. Amelia mentioned, oh, there you go. See, your mom's has a management company for her properties, and that comes in handy because it could be a nominal fee, but it takes away the headache and feeling so overwhelmed by all this. And of course, you want to make sure that you're in compliance with the law, and this management company comes in handy in making sure they're limiting your liability and you're complying with the landlord tenant laws in your jurisdiction or in the jurisdiction where this property is located. Because it could be that, Rachel lives in Texas and the duplex that she inherited is in California. So also now, not only are you dealing with property management, but you're also dealing with property in another jurisdiction. So things to think about. So again, she's so overwhelmed. So Nadia has basically asked you to prepare a client letter, address this client letter to Rachel, and identify the rights and duties of a landlord under a lease agreement, and as well as the rights and duties of a tenant, and kind of just give her a crash course on some of the basic information, just enough to educate her about what she may want to do, right? And then, of course, yes, that's a good point, Mel. They're also good at screening those tenants. This is where they do their due diligence. They do the background check, the employment check, the reference check. They look at not only the criminal background check, but your credit check, look to see about your employment and all that good stuff, right? And then, of course, Rachel has also asked that you describe the remedies available to Rachel should one of her tenants be in default, again, explaining the eviction process. And then finally, explain to Rachel the 4 types of tenancies that are available that are discussed in Chapter 16, as well as how is each one terminated. So at a minimum, you are going to draft a 2-page minimum letter. This is excluding your title page and your reference page. And this is, let me share that template that I created earlier. So again, this is a client letter. Here is that same information that I provided for the Unit 7 assignment, which is a law firm letterhead. You're going to insert the date, Rachel Banks, and then just include make up an address. All we're given is her name. You can use your city and your state since you are going to be using your jurisdictional laws. And then the subject line can be something along the lines understanding landlord and tenant rights, remedies, and lease termination. Your salutation, because this is a letter, so make sure to have a salutation. Dear Rachel Banks. You have an introduction, basically introducing the purpose of this letter. You, as a paralegal, are writing this letter to Rachel, and you've been notified that she recently, again, you can give your condolences and explain that you recently became aware that she inherited some duplex properties and she'd like to have some information about dealing with being a landlord, right? So here are the categories that you want to make sure you have to comply with the grading rubric. Rights and duties of a landlord. Explain that now she is the landlord. And then explain the rights and duties of her tenants and the current tenants that she has living on the property. Then what are the landlord's remedies for a tenant default? So what happens if one of the tenants is in default, and what is a default? Explain that. And then give an example of a default. And then of course, what are the different types of tenancies and how is each one terminated? And then just a conclusion. Make sure you include your name, your title, and the name of the law firm, and then your references. So this is where you also reference and cite your property code, your landlord tenant law, since you're using your state's law for this information. Pretty straightforward. Any questions? Again, Unit 8 starts tomorrow, and you'll have until Tuesday, February 25th to work on this letter. I know we are still in Unit 7, so some of you are still completing your participation in the Unit 7 discussion board, as well as your Unit 7 assignment. Great. And again, make sure to single space your client letter and double space between paragraphs. Sherry, good question. Yes, it's okay if you go over. 3 pages is fine. What some students tend to struggle with is meeting that 2-page minimum. So that's great that you have enough content to go into 3 pages. Try your best, and hopefully those categories can help you reach that 2-page minimum. And again, this is why it's important to check your paragraph settings. Don't triple space or double space just to try to reach that 2-page minimum, because when I download your document, I'll be able to see your paragraph settings, and you'll still receive a point deduction for format and also for content delivery and not meeting that 2-page minimum. Okay, great. So one thing I want to highlight before I end our seminar for this evening is the different type of tenancies, because this is something you'll, for the most part, there is a difference between residential leases and commercial leases. So I just want to be clear about that. We are discussing residential leases in our assignment. So even though our Chapter 16 does focus on commercial leases as well, the main focus for our client letter will be those residential leases. So here is something that we'll talk about in the discussion board when I add those additional questions is, again, the difference between an assignment and a sublease. An assignment is basically where you transfer all your interest under the lease agreement and you keep nothing. So let's say, for example, I am renting an apartment and I entered into a 2-year lease agreement, and I got a job offer in another state, and I've already lived in the property for 1 year. I have 1 year left in this lease agreement, but I'm going to be in breach because I am moving out of state. So I can talk to my landlord and let my landlord know the situation, and perhaps the landlord will give me an opportunity to find another person to take over, the residence. So let's say I have a cousin who is looking for a place, just recently got a divorce, and if my landlord consents, because I have to have that consent in writing, to basically assign the remaining months of the lease agreement to my cousin, then I can do that assignment. So basically, my cousin will be stepping into my shoes as the tenant, and we'll have this. And oftentimes, the landlord will allow this, maybe perhaps if they do. Their own application, things like that. They want to make sure that this person is able to make payments and is a good fit. So that doesn't preclude the landlord from still performing their own due diligence in basically screening this new tenant. A sublease is where, let's say, for example, I'll be traveling for the summer. I'll be traveling overseas for 3 or 4 months, and I want to sublease my apartment, kind of similar to maybe perhaps an Airbnb. I'd have to look at the clause of the agreement to see if there's a sublease provision, and if I can sublet my apartment during those times, those months that I'll be out of the country. I still need landlord permission in writing. And if this is allowed, then I can sublease it, and the person I sublease it to will stay in the property for those 3 or 4 months. I still retain all rights and interests under the lease. So if my subleasee does something wrong, I could be held liable. Let's say they do property damage or something to the property, then of course, because there's still privity of contract with me, I can still be held responsible. Another example is, let's say my leasee is not making those payments, I can still be held responsible. So it's also important who I find to sublease my apartment. So you want to be careful with that. So that's one of the differences I want to talk about. One last thing are those tenancies, which again, I must have missed them, or these are commercial leases. They might not be in this PowerPoint. If they're not, I will add them in our discussion board, but you can find them and here they are. I'll share my book. Just so you can make sure that you talk about this in your assignment. So here they are. The 4 types of tenancies that we have are known as tenancy for years, periodic tenancy, tenancy at will, and tenancy at sufferance. And then you'll also see how they're terminated. For example, a tenancy for years is basically going to be a lease agreement that has a fixed period of time. So that would be an example they give you here is a student living on campus and living in the dorms will have a tenancy for that academic year. It could be fall to spring, and usually in the summer, it's a different periodic tenancy, right? And then how do you terminate it? Again, it gives you the explanation because it has to satisfy with the statute of frauds. There's a section that talks about that to comply with the writing requirement. And then periodic tenancy is also another one. And it gives you an example, how is it created, and then how it can be terminated, and the continuous renewal. And then here's tenancy at will. And then the last one is tenancy at sufferance. This is where, let's say your lease ended. Say you had a 1-year lease and it ended, and now you just become, you didn't move out and you weren't required to move out, and your landlord just let you stay there. So now you kind of become month to month, right? It's also known as, like, as a holdover tenant. And here they give you another example. And here's the summary of the 4. You can incorporate this in your client letter. Any questions, comments, concerns? And again, like I mentioned, all this information is in our chapter 16. Great. Okay. If there are no objections, we can end seminar a few minutes early, just to allow me some time to prepare for my next seminar. I do have another seminar this evening, and also to grade your participation for tonight's seminar. You can also download the PowerPoint in our virtual office discussion board forum. Okay, great. And this also gives you time to wrap up Unit 7. Again, you still have today to participate in that discussion board for Unit 7 and to turn in your Unit 7 assignment. Great. Thank you, Cherie. Take care. Enjoy the rest of your evening and the rest of your week, class, and I'll see you in our discussion board. Good night. Bye, Jessica. Good night, Brandon. Take care, Mel. Good night, Cherie. Bye, Celeste. Good night. Take care. Bye, Miranda. Thank you. Appreciate it. Good night. Chuck, Mama. Take care. You too, Johanna. Night.